Peace, love, and life, family. It's your girl, Morgan Renee Myers, just tuning in with y'all. I hope everybody is having a great day. Today is Friday, January 11th, 2019, when I'm recording this. I will be reading Chapter 4 of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, by Mildred D. Taylor. I've read the first 3 chapters already and uploaded them to YouTube and got great responses. The first chapter has over 2,000 views, and all the students that are having these as assigned readings are enjoying it. There are also some people out there telling me how I should and should not record my videos, and I'm here to let you all know that I enjoy reading. So I enjoy doing this on my own time. I record it on my Facebook Live, and then I download it and upload it to my YouTube. So whatever setting, how I want to read it, how I want to look up words, that's what I'm going to do. And some people like it, and some people don't. So it's just a lesson that I'm continuing to learn, that not everybody is for you or agrees with you. We all have our own opinions, which is fine. But we don't have to try to be in control of people, because we can't. All right, so I'm just going to hop into it. Like I said, I read chapter 3 yesterday, so I'm up on chapter 4 now. 1, 2, and 3 is listed on my YouTube page. So yeah, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. Chapter 4. Cassie, what's the matter with you, girl? Big Ma asked as she thrust 3 sticks of dried pine into the stove to rekindle the dying morning fire. You sure are taking a sorrowful long time to churn that butter. Nothing, I murmured. Nothing. Big Ma turned and looked directly at me. You've been moping around here for the past week like you got the whooping cough, flu, and measles all put together. I sighed deeply and continued to churn. Big Ma reached out and felt my forehead, then my cheeks. Frowning, she pulled her hand away as Mama entered the kitchen. Mary, feel this child's face, she said. She seemed warm to you. Mama cupped my face in her thin hands. You feel sick, Cassie? No. How do you feel? All right, I said, still churning. Mama studied me with the same disturbed look Big Ma wore, and a tiny frown line appeared on her brow. Cassie, she said softly, fixing her dark eyes upon me. Is there something you want to tell me? I was on the verge of blurting out the awful truth about the bus and the men in the night, but then I remembered the pact Stacy had made us all swear to when I told him, Christopher, John, and Little Man about the caravan, and I said instead, no, ma'am, and began to churn again. Abruptly, Mama took hold of the churning stick, her eyes searching mine. As she studied me, she seemed about to ask me something. Then the question faded and she pulled away, lifting the lid off the churn. It looks ready now, she said with a sigh. Dip out the butter like I showed you and wash it down. I'll take care of the milk. I scooped the butter from the churning lid onto a plate and went through the curtain to a small pantry off the kitchen to get the molding dish. It had been placed on a high shelf under several other dishes, and I had to stand on a stool to get it. As I eased it out, Mama and Big Ma spoke softly in worried tones on the other side of the curtain. Something bad with that child, Mary. She's not sick, Mama. There's all sorts of sickness. She ain't ate right going on over a week. She ain't sleeping right neither. Restless and murmuring in her sleep all night long, and she won't hardly go out and play, rather be in here helping us. Now, you know that ain't like that child. There's a moment's pause, and Mama whispered so I could hardly hear her. Mama, you think you could have seen? Oh, Lord, no, child, Big Ma exclaimed hastily. I checked in there right after they passed, and she was sound asleep. She couldn't have seen them old devils. The boys neither. Mama sighed. The boys, they're not themselves either. All of them, too quiet. Here it is Saturday morning, and they're quiet as church mice. I don't like it. And I can't make the feeling it's got something to do with Cassie. Without warning, I had lost my balance and with an absurd topple from the knee-high stool, crashed upon the floor with the molding dish. So I want to take a second and break this down real quick. So while Cassie is going in the kitchen to get butter, they're churning. Back in these times, you had to make your own butter and things like that. So they're churning, and she sends her in there to get the molding dish. That's what they put the butter in to make it mold into the shape of butter. But how did I know to screen Cassie instead of just read it in this last sentence? Here it is, Saturday morning, and they're quiet as church mice. I don't like it, and I can't shake the feeling. It's got something to do with, then I said Cassie, because there's a dash here, and then it has Cassie and an exclamation point. So that lets me know that whatever I'm about to say after this dash, I need to say with some emphasis. And I have context clues that she said that she stands on a stool, she goes in the kitchen, it's high up, she can't reach it. So I can use my context clues and assume that maybe she is foreshadowing she might fall. So by me reading that, that's what I did. And if you don't read it like that, say you just read it, I don't like it, I can't shake the feeling, it's got something to do with Cassie. Without warning, I had lost my balance and with an absurd topple from the knee-high stool, crashed upon the floor with the molding dish. So then you would have picked up on, okay, she fell. You know, so that's what you have to do when you read, because we don't always get it right the first time. I am 28 and I still mess up on reading, but it's always about context clues, and just going back and making sure that they're flowing with the story, that you're not just reading to read, but that you're reading to understand. Okay. So without warning, I had lost my balance and with an absurd topple from the knee-high stool, crashed upon the floor with the molding dish. Cassie, you hurt? Mama asked, stooping beside me. No, I mumbled, feeling very, I'm saying gnome because it says N-O''M. Gnome, like no ma'am, but all together real country like gnome. Gnome, I mumbled, feeling very clumsy and close to tears. I knew that if I had let the tears fall, Mama's suspicion that something was wrong would be confirmed, for I never cried about such a silly thing as a fall. In fact, I seldom ever cried. So instead of crying, I jumped up quickly and began to pick up broken pieces of the dish. I'm sorry, Mama, I said. That's all right, she said, helping me. When we had swept the chips away with the long field straw broom, she told me, leave the butter, Cassie, and go on in with the boys. But, Mama, I'll do the butter. Now go on, do like I say. I stared up at Mama, wondering if she would ever know what we had done, then joined the boys who were sitting listlessly around the fire, absently listening to TJ. See, fellows, there's a system to getting out of work, TJ was expounding as I sat down. Just don't be around when it's got to be done. Only thing is, you can't let your folks know that's what you're doing. See, you should do like me. Like this morning, when Mama wanted to bring back them scissors she borrowed from Miss Logan, I ups and volunteered so she don't have to make this long trip down here, and she being so busy and all. And naturally, when I got here, y'all wanted me to stay a while and talk to y'all, so what could I do? I couldn't be impolite, could I? And by the time I finally convinced y'all I gotta go, all the work will be done at home. TJ chuckled with satisfaction. Yeah, you just have to use that old brain, that's all. He was quiet a moment, expecting some comment on his discourse, but no one said a word. TJ's eyes roamed the length of the room, then he admonished. See, if you smart like me, Stacy, you use that old brain to get the questions on that big test coming up. Just think, they probably just sitting right here in this very room waiting to be discovered. Stacy cast TJ an annoyed look, but did not speak. Y'all sure are a sorry lot this morning, TJ observed. A fellow's just wasting his know-how talking to y'all. Ain't nobody asked you to give it, said Stacy. Well, you don't have to get snippety about it, replied TJ haughtily. Again, silence prevailed, but that would not do for TJ. Say, how about we sneak down to that old Wallace store and learn how to do them new dances? Mama told us not to go down there, Stacy said. You some mama's boy or something? You gotta do everything your mama tells? You go on if you wanna, said Stacy quietly, not raising the TJ's bait. But we staying here. Again, silence. Then TJ said, say, y'all hear the latest about them night men? Suddenly, all eyes turned from the fire and riveted themselves upon him. Our faces were eager question marks. We were totally in TJ's power. What about him? Stacy asked, almost evenly. TJ, of course, intended to nurse the moment for as long as he could. You see, when a fella's as smart as me, he gets to know things that other folks don't. Now, this kind of information ain't for the ears of little kids, so I really shouldn't even tell y'all. Then don't, said Stacy with smooth finality, turning back toward the fire as if he cared not at all about the night men. Taking his cue, I nudged Christopher John, and Christopher John nudged the little man. The three of us forced ourselves to stare into the fire in feigned disinterest. Without a captive audience, TJ had to reinterest us by getting to the point. Well, about a week ago, they rode down to Mr. Sam Tatum's place. You know, down the Jackson Road Strawberry, and you know what they done? Stacy, Little Man, and I kept our eyes upon the fire, but Christopher John piped eagerly. What? I poked Christopher John, and he turned guiltily around, but TJ, triumphant with an assured audience of one, settled back in his chair, ready to prolong the suspense. You know Mama killed me if she knowed I was telling this. I heard her and Miss Claiborne Thompson talking about it. They was real scared. Don't know why, though. Them old night men sure wouldn't scare me none. Like I told Claude. Hey, y'all, Stacy said, standing up and motioning us up. Mama said she wanted us to take some milk and butter down to Miss Jackson before noon. We better get started. I nodded, and Christopher John, Little Man, and I got up. Tarred and feathered him, TJ announced hastily. Pour the blackest tar they could find all over him, then plaster him with chicken feathers. TJ laughed. Can you imagine that? But why? Asked Little Man, forgetting our ploy. This time TJ did not slow down. I don't know if it's y'all's little ears should hear this, but it seems he called Mr. Jim Lee Barnett a liar. He's the man who runs the mercantile down in Strawberry. Mr. Tatum's supposed to done told him that he ain't ordered up all them things Mr. Barnett done charged him for. Mr. Barnett said he had all them things Mr. Tatum ordered writ down, and when Mr. Tatum asked to see the list of his, Mr. Barnett says, "You calling me a liar, boy?" And Mr. Tatum says, "Yes, sir, I guess I is." That done it. Then it wasn't 'cause of the bus? Christopher John blurted out. Bus? What's a bus got to do with it? Nothing, said Stacy quickly. Nothing at all. Well, if anybody said them nightmen was down in here 'cause of some stupid bus, they crazy, said TJ authoritatively. 'Cause my information come direct from Miss Claire Thompson, who seen Mr. Tatum herself. You sure? Stacy asked. Sure. Sure, I'm sure. When do I ever say anything when I ain't sure? Stacy smiled with relief. Come on, let's get the milk. All of us went to the kitchen, then to the bedrooms to get our coats. When we got outside, TJ remembered that he had left his cap by the fire and ran back to retrieve it. As soon as we were alone, Little Man asked, Stacy, you really think them night men put tar and feathers all over Mr. Tatum? I suppose so, said Stacy. Little Man frowned, but it was Christopher John who spoke, whispering shrilly as if a stray morning ghost might overhear. If they ever find out about the bus, you think they're going to put tar and feathers all over us? Little Man's frown deepened, and he observed gravely. If they did, we never get clean again. Cassie, said Christopher John, his eyes wide, was you real scared when you seen them? Little Man shivered with excitement. I wish I could have seen them. Well, I don't, declared Christopher John. In fact, I wish I never heard of no night men or buses or secrets or holes in the road. And with that outburst, he stuffed his pudgy hands into his thin jacket, pressed his lips firmly together, and refused to say another word. After a few moments, Stacy said, What's keeping TJ? The rest of us shrugged, then followed Stacy back up the porch into Mama's room. As we entered, TJ jumped. He was standing at the desk with Mama's W.E.B. Du Bois, the Negro, in his hands. That don't look like your cat, said Stacy. Aw, man, I ain't done nothing. Just looking at Miss Logan's history book, that's all. I'm mighty interested in that place called Egypt she been telling us about, and them black kings that was ruling back then. Still talking, he casually put down the book and picked up his cap. All four of us looked accusingly at TJ, and he halted. Say, what is this? What's the meaning of sneaking up on me like that anyway? Y'all think I was looking for them test questions or something? Shoot, a fella think you didn't trust him. Then, thrusting his arm around Stacy's shoulders, he decided, friends gotta trust each other, Stacy, 'cause ain't nothing like a true friend. And with those words of wisdom, he left the room, leaving us to wonder how he had managed to slink out of this one. The Monday after his arrival, Mr. Morrison had moved into the deserted tenant shack that stood in the south pasture. It was a sorry mess, that house. Its door hung sadly from a broken hinge, its porch floorboards were rotted, and its one-room interior was densely occupied by rats, spiders, and other field creatures. But Mr. Morrison was a quiet man, almost shy, and although Mama had offered him lodging in our house, he preferred the old shack. Mama sensed that Mr. Morrison was a private person, and she did not object to the move, but she did send the boys and me to the house to help clean it. Little Man, Christopher John, and I took to Mr. Morrison immediately and had no objections to the cleaning. Anybody who was a friend of Papa's was all right in our book. Besides, when he was near, nightmen and burnings and midnight tarrings faded into a hazy distance, but Stacy remained aloof and had little to do with him. After the cleaning, I asked Mama if Christopher John, little man, and I could go visit Mr. Morrison, but she said no. But, Mama, I want to know more about him, I explained. I just want to know how come he's so big. You know about him as much as you need to know, she decided. And long as Mr. Morrison stays here, that's his house. If he wants you down there, he'll ask you. Don't know how come y'all want to go down there no way, Stacy said moodily when Mama was out of hearing. 'Cause we like him, that's why, I answered, tired of his distant attitude toward Mr. Morrison. Then, as discreetly as I could, I said, What's the matter with you, boy? Not liking Mr. Morrison? Stacy shrugged. I like him all right. Don't act that way. Stacy looked away from me. Don't need him here. All that work he doing, I could have done it myself. You couldn't have done no such thing. Besides, I looked around to be certain that Big Ma and Mama were not near. Oh, let me read that again. I thought that was something she was saying. Stacy looked away. Don't need him here. All that work he doing, I could have done it myself. You couldn't have done no such thing. Besides, I looked around to be certain that Big Ma and Mama were not near. Besides, Papa didn't just bring him here to do no work. You know how come he really here. Stacy turned toward me haughtily. I could have taken care of that, too. I rolled my eyes at him, but held my peace. I didn't feel like a fight, and as long as Mr. Morrison was within hollering distance of the back porch, it made little difference to me what Stacy thought he could do. So, Mr. Morrison is a friend that their father is off working on railroads or doing something to earn income, and he sends Mr. Morrison to come stay with the family. I still don't really know what Mr. Morrison's story is, why he's so available to just come up and live with these people, but these children's father is off working, and their mom and I believe is the dad's mom, or it might be the mom's mom, their grandmother, somebody's mother, is living there with them as well. So the 3 kids, the grandma, 4 kids, Stacy, Cassie, Little John, and Christopher John and Little Man. So 4 kids, 2 women, and then the dad is off working, and Mr. Morrison is staying in the shack that they have on their property a little ways down. So that's what that little tiff between Stacy, which is a boy, and Cassie was about. I sure wouldn't want that big old man staying in my place, said TJ on the way to school. I bet you he get mad one time, he'd take old little man and swing him over that tree yonder like he wasn't nothing but a twig. He laughed. Then his little man set his lips and stared angrily up. Course, I could probably about do that myself. Couldn't either, denied little man. Hush, man, said Stacy. TJ, leave man alone. I ain't bothering him. Little man's my buddy, ain't you, man? Little man scowled but didn't reply. TJ turned back to Stacy. You ready for that history test? Hope so, said Stacy. But I keep forgetting them dates. Betcha I can help you, if you be nice. How? You worse than I am about dates. TJ grinned, then slyly pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and handed it to Stacy. Stacy unfolded it, looked at it curiously, then frowned. You planning on cheating? Well, no, I ain't planning on it, said TJ seriously. Just if I gotta. Well, you ain't gonna, said Stacy, tearing the paper in two. Hey, what's the matter with you, man? Cried TJ, grabbing for the paper. But Stacy turned his back to him and tore the paper into bits, then deposited them in the gully. Man, that show ain't right. I wouldn't do you that way. Maybe not, replied Stacy, but at least this way you won't get no trouble. TJ mumbled. If failing ain't trouble, I don't know what is. Little man, Christopher John, Claude, and I was sitting on the bottom step of the 7th grade class building after school, waiting for Stacy and TJ when the front door banged open and TJ shot out and tore across the yard. What's the matter with him? Asked Christopher John. Ain't he going to wait for Stacy? The rest of the 7th grade, led by little Willie Wiggins and Mo Turner, spilled from the building. There he go, cried little Willie as TJ disappeared on the forest road. Mo Turner yelled, let's see where he going. Then he and 3 other boys dashed away in pursuit of TJ, but the others stood restlessly near the steps as if school had not yet ended. Hey, what's going on? I asked little Willie. What's everybody waiting around for? And where's Stacy? Demanded little man. Little Willie smiled. Stacy inside with Miss Logan. He got whipped today. Whipped? I cried. Why can't nobody whip Stacy? Who done it? Your mama, laughed little Willie. Mama? Christopher John, little man, and I exclaimed. Little Willie nodded. Yep, in front of everybody. I swallowed hard, feeling very sorry for my older brother. It was bad enough to be whipped in front of 30 others by a teacher, but to get it by one's own mother, now that was downright embarrassing. "Why Mama do that?" asked Christopher John. She called him with a cheat notes during the history examination. "Mama knows Stacy wouldn't cheat," I declared. Little Willie shrugged. "Well, whether she knowed it or not, she sure enough whipped him. Of course now, she gave him a chance to get out of it when he said he wasn't cheating, and she asked him how he got them cheat notes, but Stacy wouldn't tell on old TJ, and you know good and well old TJ wasn't about to say them notes was his." "Cheat notes? But how TJ get cheat notes? Stacy got rid of them things this morning." "Come noontime, though," replied Little Willie, "TJ was in them woods, busy writing himself another set. Me and Mo seen him." "Well, what the devil was Stacy doing with them?" "Well, we was in the middle of the examination, and old TJ slips out them cheat notes. Me and Clarence here was sitting right behind him and TJ and seen the whole thing. Stacy was sitting right beside TJ, and when we seen them notes, he motioned TJ to put them away. At first, TJ wouldn't do it, but then he seen Miss Logan starting toward him, and he slipped Stacy the notes. Well, Stacy didn't see Miss Logan coming when he took them notes, and by the time he saw her, it was too late to get rid of them. Wasn't nothing Miss Logan could do but whip him. Failed him, too. And old TJ just sat there and ain't said a word," interjected Clarence, laughing. But knowing Stacy, I bet you old TJ ain't going to get away with it," chuckled Little Willie. "And TJ know it, too. That's why he lit out of here like he done, and I bet you..." "Hey, Stacy!" Everyone turned and Stacy bounded down the steps. His square face was unsmiling, but there was no anger in his voice when he quietly asked, "Anybody seen TJ?" All the students answered at once, indicating that TJ was headed west toward home, then surrounded Stacy as he started across the lawn. Christopher John, Little Man, Claude, and I followed. When we reached the crossroads, Mo Turner was waiting. "TJ went down to the Wallace store," he announced. Stacy stopped, and so did everyone else. Stacy stared past Jefferson Davis, then back down the road toward Great Faith. Looking over his shoulder, he found me and ordered, "Cassie, you and Christopher John and man go on home." "You come too," I said, afraid of where he was going. "Got something to take care of first," he said, walking away. "Mama gonna take care of you too," I hollered after him. You know she said we wasn't to go down there, and she find out she gonna wear you out again. Papa too." But Stacy did not come back. For a moment, Little Man, Christopher John, Clark, and I stood watching Stacy and the others heading swiftly northward. Then Little Man said, "I want to see what he gonna do." "I don't," declared Christopher John. "Come on," I said, starting after Stacy with Little Man and Claude beside me. "I don't want no whipping," objected Christopher John, standing alone in the crossroads. But when he saw that we were not coming back, he puffed to join us, grumbling all the while. The Wallace store stood almost a half mile between Jefferson Davis on a triangular lot that faced the Soldiers Bridge crossroads. Once the Granger Plantation store, it had been run by the Wallaces for as long as I could remember, and most of the people within the 40-mile stretch between Smellings Creek and Strawberry shopped there. The other three corners of the crossroads were forest land, black and dense. The store consisted of a small building with a gas pump in front and a storage house in back. Beyond the store, against the forest edge, were two gray clapboard houses and a small garden, but there were no fields. The Wallaces did not farm. Stacy and the other students were standing in the doorway of the store when Little Man, Christopher John, Clark, and I ran up. We squeezed through so we could see inside. A man we all knew was Caleb Wallace stood behind the counter. A few other men sat around the stove playing checkers, and Jeremy's older brothers, R.W. and Melvin, who had dropped out of school long ago, leaned sleepy-eyed against the counter, staring at us. "Y'all go on to the back," said Caleb Wallace, "lesson y'all want to buy something. Mr. Dewberry got the music going already." As we turned away from the entrance, Melvin Sims said, "Just look at the little niggers come to dance," and the laughter of the men filled the room. Christopher John tugged at my arm. "I don't like this place, Cassie. Let's go on home." "We can't leave without Stacy," I said. Music beckoned from the storage room where Dewberry Wallace was placing round brown bottles on a small table as we crowded in. Aside from the table, there was no furniture in the room. Boxes lined the walls and the center floor had been cleared for dancing. Several older couples from Great Faith were already engaged in movements I had never seen before. "What are they doing?" asked Little Man. I shrugged. "I guess that's what they call dancing." "There he go," Someone shouted as the back door of the storeroom slammed shut. Stacy turned quickly and sped to the back of the building. TJ was fleeing straight toward Soldiers Road. Stacy tore across the Wallace yard and, leaping like a forest fox, fell upon TJ, knocking him down. The two boys rolled toward the road, each trying to keep the other's back pinned to the ground. But then Stacy, who was stronger, gained the advantage, and TJ, finding that he could not budge him, cried, "Hey, wait a minute, man. Let me explain." Stacy did not let him finish. Jumping up, he pulled TJ up too and hit him squarely in the face. TJ staggered back, holding his eyes as if he were badly hurt, and Stacy momentarily let down his guard. At that moment, TJ rammed into Stacy, forcing the fight to the ground again. Little man, Christopher John, and I, with the others, circled the fighters, chanting loudly as they rolled back and forth, punching at each other. All of us were so engrossed in the battle that no one saw a mule wagon halt on the road and a giant man step out. It wasn't until I realized that the shouting had stopped behind us and that the girls and boys beside me were falling back that I looked up. Mr. Morrison towered above us. He did not look at me or Christopher John or Little Man, although I knew he had seen us, but walked straight to the fighters and lifted a still swinging Stacy off TJ. After a long, tense moment, he said to Stacy, "You and your sister and brothers get on in the wagon." We walked through the now silent crowd. Caleb and Dewberry Wallace, standing on the front porch of the store with the Simpsonses, stared at Mr. Morrison as we passed, but Mr. Morrison looked through them as if they were not there. Stacy sat in front of the wagon with Mr. Morrison. The rest of us climbed into the back. "Now we're gonna get it," shuddered Christopher John. "I told y'all we should have gone on home." Before Mr. Morrison took the reins, he handed Stacy a handkerchief in which to wrap his bruised right hand, but he did not say a word, and it wasn't until we had passed the crossroads leading to Great Faith, that the silence was broken. "Mr. Morrison, you going to tell Mama?" Stacy asked huskily. Mr. Morrison was very quiet as Jack the mule clopped noisily onto the dry road. "Seems I heard your mama tell y'all not to go up to that Wallace store," he said at last. "Yes, sir," said Stacy, glancing nervously at Mr. Morrison. Then he blurted out, "But I had a real good reason." "Ain't never no reason good enough to disobey your mama." The boys and I looked woefully at each other, and my bottom stung from the awful thought of Mama's leather strapped against it. "But, Mr. Morrison," I cried anxiously, "TJ was hiding there because he thought Stacy wouldn't never come down there to get him. But Stacy had to go down there because TJ was cheating." "Hush, Cassie," Stacy ordered, turning sharply around. I faltered for only a moment before deciding that my bottom was more important than Stacy's code of honor. "And Stacy had to take the blame for it, and Mama whipped him right in front of God and everybody." Once the truth had been disclosed, I waited with dry throat and nauseous stomach for Mr. Morrison to say something. When he did, all of us strained tensely forward. "I ain't going to tell her," he said quietly. Christopher John sighed with relief. "Ain't going down there no more either," he promised. Little Man and I agreed, but Stacy stared long and hard at Mr. Morrison. "How come, Mr. Morrison?" he asked. "How come you ain't going to tell Mama?" Mr. Morrison slowed Jack as we turned into the road leading home. "'Cause I'm leaving it up to you to tell her." "What?" we exclaimed together. "Sometimes a person's got to fight," he said slowly. "But that store ain't the place to be doing it. From what I hear, folks like them Wallaces got no respect at all for colored folks, and they just think it's funny when we fight each other. Your mama know them Wallaces ain't good folks. That's why she don't want y'all down here, and y'all owe it to yourselves to tell her. But I'm going to leave it up to y'all to decide." Stacy nodded thoughtfully and wound the handkerchief tighter around his wounded hand. His face was not scarred, so if he could just figure out a way to explain the bruises on his hand to Mama without lying, he was in the clear. For Mr. Morrison had not said that he had to tell her. But for some reason I could not understand. He said, "All right, Mr. Morrison, I'll tell her." "Boy, you crazy," I cried as Christopher John and Little Man speedily came to the same conclusion. If he did not dare care about his own skin, he could at least consider ours. But he seemed not to hear us as his eyes met Mr. Morrison, and the two of them smiled in subtle understanding, the distance between them fading. As we neared the house, Mr. Granger's Packard rolled from the dusty driveway. Mr. Morrison directed Jack to the side of the road until the big car had passed, then swung the wagon back into the road center and up the drive. Big Ma was standing by the yard gate that led onto the drive, gazing across the road at the forest. "Big Ma, What was Mr. Granger doing here? Stacy asked, jumping from the wagon and going to her. Little man, Christopher John, and I hopped down and followed him. Nothing, Big Ma replied absently, her eyes still on the forest. Just worrying me about this land again. Oh, said Stacy, his tone indicating that he considered the visit of no importance. Mr. Granger had always wanted the land. He turned and went to help Mr. Morrison. Little man and Christopher John went to help him, but I remained by the gate with Big Ma. Big Ma, I said, what Mr. Granger need more land for? Don't need it, Big Ma said flatly. Got more land than he know what to do with. Well, what he want with ours then? Just like to have it, that's all. Well, seems to me he's just being greedy. You ain't gonna sell it to him, are you? Big Ma did not answer me. Instead, she pushed open the gate and walked down the drive and across the road into the forest. I ran after her. We walked in silence down the narrow cow path which wound through the old forest to the pond, and as we neared the pond, the forest gaped open into a wide brown glade, man-made by the felling of many trees, some of them still on the ground. They had been cut during the summer after Mr. Anderson came from Strawberry with an offer to buy the trees. The offer was backed with a threat, and Big Ma was afraid. So Anderson's lumbermen came, chopping and sawing, destroying the fine old trees. Papa was away on the railroad then, but Mama sent Stacy for him. He returned and stopped the cutting, but not before many of the trees had already fallen. Big Ma surveyed the clearing without a word. Then, stepping around the rotting trees, she made her way to the pond and sat down on one of them. I sat close beside her and waited for her to speak. After a while, she shook her head and said, I'm so glad your grandpa never had to see none of this. He dearly loved these here old trees. Him and me, we used to come down here early mornings or just before the sun was about to set and just sit and talk. He used to call this place his thinking spot, and he called that old pond there Caroline, after me. She smiled vaguely, but not at me. You know, I wasn't hardly 18 when Paul Edward married me and brung me here. He was older than me, about 8 years, and he was smart. Whew, my Lord, that was one smart man. He had himself a mind like a steel trap. Anything he seen done, he could do it. He had to learn carpentry back up there near Macon, Georgia, when he was born. Born into slavery he was, 2 years before freedom come, and him and his mama stayed on that plantation after the fighting was finished. But then when he gone to be 14 and his mama died, he left that place and worked his way across here up to Vicksburg. That's where he met you, ain't it, Big Ma? I asked, already knowing the answer. Big Ma nodded, smiling. Sure was. He was carpentering and up there. My papa took me in with him to Vicksburg. We was tenant farming about 30 miles from there to see about getting a store-bought rocker for my mama. And there was old Paul Edward working in their furniture shop just as big. Had himself a good job, but that old job wasn't what he wanted. He wanted himself some land. Kept on talking about land, and then this place come up for sale. And he bought himself 200 acres from that Yankee, didn't he? Big Ma chuckled. That man went right on over to see Mr. Hollenbeck and said, Mr. Hollenbeck, I understand you got land to sell, and I'd be interested in buying me about 200 acres if your price is right. Oh, Mr. Hollenbeck questioned him good about where he was going to get the money to pay him, but Paul Edward just said, don't seem to me it's your word about how I'm going to get the money, just as long as you get your price. Just as long as you get paid your price. And Mr. Hollenbeck went on and let him have it. Of course, now, he was just about as eager to sell this land as Paul Edward was to buy. He'd had it going on for 20 years. Bought it during Reconstruction from the Grangers. Because they didn't have no money to pay their taxes. Not only didn't they have tax money, didn't have no money at all. That war left them plumb broke. Their old Confederate money wasn't worth nothing, and both Northern and Southern soldiers had to ransack their place. Them Grangers didn't have nothing but they land left, and they had to sell 2,000 acres of it to get money to pay them taxes and rebuild the rest of it. And that Yankee bought the whole 2,000. Then he turned around and tried to sell it back to him, Big Ma? Sure did. But not till 1807 when your grandpa not till 87 when your grandpa bought himself that 200 acres. As I hears it, that Yankee offered to sell all 2,000 acres back to Harlan Granger's daddy for less than the land was worth, but that old Fillmore Granger was just about as tight with a penny as anybody ever lived, and he wouldn't buy it back. So Mr. Hollenbeck just let other folks know he was selling, and it didn't take long for he sold all of it, because it was some mighty fine land. Besides your grandpa, a bunch of other small farmers bought about 800 acres, and Mr. Jameson bought the rest. But that wasn't our Mr. Jameson, I supplied normally. That was his daddy. Charles Jameson was his name, Big Ma said. A fine old gentleman, too. He was a good neighbor, and he always treated us fair, just like his son. The Jamesons was what folks call Old South from up in Vicksburg, and as I understands it, before the war, they had as much money as anybody, and even after the war, they managed better than some other folks, 'cause they had made themselves some northern money. Anyways, old Mr. Jameson got it into his mind that he wanted to farm, and he moved his family from Vicksburg down in here. Mr. Wade Jameson was about 8 years old then. But he didn't like the farm, I said. Oh, he liked it all right. Just wasn't never much hand at it, though. And after he went up north to law school and all, he just felt he ought to practice his law. Is that how come he sold Grandpa and Mother 200 acres? Sure is. And it was mighty good of him to do it, too. My Paul Edward had been eyeing that 200 acres ever since 1910 when he done paid off the bank for them first 200. But old Mr. Jameson didn't want to sell. About that same time, Harlan Granger come head of the Granger plantation. You know, him and Wade Jameson about the same year's children, and he wanted to buy back every inch of land that used to belong to the Grangers. That man crazy about anything that was before the war, and he wanting his land to be every bit like it was then. Already had more than 4,000 acres, but he just itching to have back them other 200,000 his granddaddy sold. Got back 800 of them, too, from them other farmers that bought from Mr. Hollenbeck. But Grandpa and old Mr. Jameson wasn't interested in selling, period, was they, Big Ma? They didn't care how much money Mr. Granger offered them, I declared with an emphatic nod. That's the truth of it, all right, agreed Big Ma. But when Mr. Jameson died in 1918 and Wade come head of the family, he sold them 200 acres to Paul Edward and the rest of his land to Harlan Granger and moved his family into Strawberry. He could have just as easy sold the full 2,000 acres to the Grangers and gotten more money, but he didn't. Until this day, Harlan Granger still hold against him because he didn't. The soft swish of falling leaves made Big Ma look up from the pond and at the trees again. Her lips curved into a tender smile as she looked around thoughtfully. You know, she said, I can still see my Paul Edwards' face the day Mr. Jameson sold him them 200 acres. He put his arms around me and looked at his new piece of land. Then he said exactly the same thing he said when he grabbed himself that first 200 acres. Said, Pretty Caroline, how you like to work this fine piece of earth with me? Sure did. Said the exact same thing. This is an interesting concept of marriage back then and partnership and working the land, like really taking care of having family and then creating your lifestyle. So they're churning butter, they're, buying land, they're working the fields. But if you think about it from an agriculture standpoint, how do we get foods in the grocery store? Like people are farming and having to do this, but it's more technology based now. We have more industrial jobs and things that are shipped in from overseas and around the world. So it's different times, but I don't know if we could even really imagine doing that in this day and time, having to grow our own food. If we want meat, we have to kill the animals ourselves, raise and, kill them and cook them ourselves. Like, it's a very interesting concept to think of. And she seemed so content with that he bought 400 acres of land, and the second time around, it's like, he said the exact same thing. You gonna, work this fine piece of earth for me, and like, she was living her best life. And it's also an interesting concept. I think she said she was like almost 18, not quite, and he was about 8 years older, and her father hooked them up. So like, even the whole idea of like, what's the word? Arranged marriages, or like even the concept of how early you could get married and start creating a family back in the day. Times have really, really changed. So she grew quiet then and rubbed the wrinkles down one hand as if to smooth them away. I gazed at the pond, glassy, gray, and calm until she was ready to go on. I had learned that at times like these, it was better to just sit and wait than to go on disrupting questions which might It was best to just sit and wait than to go asking disrupting questions which might vex her. So long ago now, she said eventually in a voice that was almost a whisper. We worked real hard getting them crops sown, getting them reaped. We had us a time. But there was good times too. We was young and strong when we started out and we liked to work. Neither of us, I'm proud to say, never was lazy, and we didn't raise us no lazy children neither. Had ourselves 6 fine children. Lost our girls when they was babies though. I suppose that's one of the reasons I love your sweet mama so much. But them boys grew strong and all of them loved this place as much as Paul, Edward, and me. They go away, they always come back to it, couldn't leave it. She shook her head and sighed. Then Mitchell, he got killed in the war, and Kevin got drowned. Her voice faded completely, but when she spoke again, it had hardened, and there was a determined glint in her eyes. Now all the boys I got is my baby boys, your papa and your Uncle Hammer, and this they place as much as it is mine. They bloods in this land, and hear that Harlan Granger always talking about buying it. He pestered Paul Edward to death about buying, and now he pestering me. She grumped angrily. He don't know nothing about me or this land he think I'm going to sell. She became silent again. A cold wind rose, biting through my jacket, and I shivered. Big Ma looked down at me for the first time. You cold? No, ma'am, I stuttered, not ready to leave the forest. Don't you be lying to me, girl, she snapped, putting out her hand. It's time we was going back to the house anyways. Your mama will be home soon. I took her hand, and together we left the Caroline. Despite our every effort to persuade Stacy otherwise, when Mama came home, he confessed that he had been fighting TJ at the Wallace store and that Mr. Morrison had stopped it. He stood awkwardly before her, disclosing only those things which he could honorably mention. He had said nothing of TJ's cheating or that Christopher John Littleman and I had been with him, and when Mama asked him a question he could not answer honestly, he simply looked at his feet and refused to speak. The rest of us sat fidgeting nervously throughout the interview, and when Mama looked our way, we swiftly found somewhere else to rest our eyes. Finally, seeing that she had gotten all the information she was going to get from Stacy, Mama turned to us. I suppose you 3 went to the store too, huh? But before any of us could squeak an answer, she exclaimed, That does it, and began to pace the floor, her arms folded, her face crossed. Although she scolded us severely, she did not whip us. We were sent to bed early, but we didn't consider that a punishment, and we doubted that Mama did either. How we had managed to escape a whipping we couldn't fathom until Saturday, when Mama woke us up before dawn and piled us into the wagon. Taking the southwest toward Smellings Creek, she said, Where we're going, the man is very sick and he doesn't look like other people, but I don't want you to be afraid or uncomfortable when you see him. Just be yourselves. We rode for almost 2 hours before turning back onto a backwoods trail. We were jarred and bounced over the rough road until we entered a clearing where a small, weather-grayed house stood and fields stretched barren beyond it. As Mama pulled up on the reins and ordered us down, the front door cracked wearily open, but no one appeared. Then Mama said, Good morning, Mrs. Berry. It's Mary Logan, David's wife. The door swung wide open, and an elderly woman, frail and toothless, stepped out. Her left arm hung crazily at her side as if it had been broken long ago but had not mended properly, and she walked with a limp. Yet she smiled wildly, throwing her good arm around Mama and hugging her. Land sakes, child, ain't you something, she exclaimed. Coming to see about these old bones. I just says the same. I says, who you reckon coming to see old folks like us? These your babies, ain't they? Lord Almighty, ain't they fine? Sure is. She hugged each of us and ushered us into the house. The interior was dark, lit only by the narrow slat of gray daylight allowed in by the open door. Stacy and I carried cans of milk and butter, and Christopher John and Little Man each had a jar of beef and a jar of Crowder peas, which Mama and Big Ma had canned. Mrs. Berry took the food, her thanks intermingled with questions about Big Ma, Papa, and others. When she had put the food away, she pulled stools from the darkness and motioned us to sit down. Then she went to the blackest corner and said, Daddy, who you s'posed to come see about us? There was no recognizable answer, only an inhuman guttural wheezing, but Mrs. Berry seemed to accept it and went on. Miss Logan and her babies. Ain't that something? She took a sheet from a nearby table. Gots to cover him, she explained. He can't hardly stand to have nothing touch him. When she was visible again, she picked up a candle stump and felt around the table for matches. He can't speak no more. The fire burned him too bad, but he understands all right. Finding the matches, he lit the candle and turned once more to the corner. A still form lay there staring at us with glittering eyes. The face had no nose, the head no hair, the skin was scarred, burned, and the lips were wizened black like charcoal. As the wheezing sound echoed from the opening that was a mouth, Mama said, Say good morning to Mrs. Berry's husband, children. The boys and I stammered a greeting, then sat silently, trying not to stare at Mr. Berry during the hour that we remained in the small house. But Mama talked softly to both Mr. and Mrs. Berry, telling them news of community as if Mr. Berry was normal as anyone else. After we were on the main road again, having ridden in thoughtful silence over the wooded trail, Mama said quietly, The Wallaces did that, children. They poured kerosene over Mr. Berry and his nephews and lit them afire. One of the nephews died, the other one's just like Mr. Berry. She allowed this information to penetrate the silence, then went on. Everyone knows they did it, and the Wallaces even laugh about it, but nothing was ever done. They're bad people, the Wallaces. That's why I don't want you to ever go to their store again, for any reason. You understand? We nodded, unable to speak as we thought of the disfigured man lying in the darkness. On the way home, we stopped at the homes of some of Mama's students, where families poured out the tenant shacks to greet us. At each farm, Mama spoke of the bad influence of the Wallaces, of the smoking and drinking permitted at their store, and asked that the family's children not be allowed to go there. The people nodded and said she was right. She also spoke of finding another store to patronize, one where the proprietors were more concerned about the welfare of the community, but she did not speak directly of what the Wallaces had done to the Berries, for, as she explained later, that was something that wavered between the known and the unknown, and to mention it outright to anyone outside of those with whom you were closest was not wise. There were too many ears that listened for others beside themselves, and too many tongues that wagged to those that shouldn't. The people only nodded, and Mama left. When we reached the Turner farm, Mo's widowed father rubbed his stubbled chin and squinted across the room at Mama. Miss Logan, he said, You know I feels the same way you do about them low-down Wallaces, but it ain't easy to just stop shopping there. They overcharges me, and I had to pay them high interest, but I got credit there 'cause Mr. Montier signs for me. Now, you know most folks around here sharecropping on Montier, Granger, or Harrison land, and most of them just about got to shop at the Wallace store or up at the Mercantile in Strawberry, which is just about as bad. Can't go no place else. Mama nodded solemnly, showing she understood. Then she said, For the past year now, our family's been shopping down at Vicksburg. There are a number of stores down there, and we found several that treat us well. Vicksburg, Mr. Turner echoed, shaking his head. Lord, Miss Logan, you ain't expecting me to go all the way up to Vicksburg. That's an overnight journey in a wagon down there and back. Mama thought on that a moment. What if someone would be willing to make a trip for you? Go all the way to Vicksburg and bring you back what you need. Won't do no good, retorted Mr. Turner. I ain't got no cash money. Mr. Montier signs for me up at the Wallace store so I can get my tools, my mule, my seed, my fertilizer, my food, and what few clothes I needs to keep my children from running plumb naked. When cotton picking time comes, he sells my cotton, takes half of it, pays my debt up at the store and my interest for their credit, then charges me 10 to 15% more as risk money for signing for me in the first place. This year I earned me near $200 after Montier took his half of the crop money, but I ain't seen a penny of it. In fact, if I manages to come out without even owing that man nothing, I figures I've had a good year. Now, who way down in Vicksburg going to give a man like me credit? Mama was very quiet and did not answer. I sure sorry, Miss Logan. I'm going to keep my youngins from up at that store, but I got to live. Y'all got it better than most folks around here 'cause y'all got y'all own place and y'all ain't got a cowtail to a lot of this stuff. But you got to understand, it ain't easy for sharecropping folks to do what you asking. Mr. Turner, Mama said in a whisper, what if someone backed your signature? Would you shop up in Vicksburg then? Mr. Turner looked at Mama strangely. Now who'd sign for me? If someone would you do it? Mr. Turner gazed into the fire, burning to a low ash, then got up and put another log on it, taking his time as he watched the fire shoot upward and suck in the log. Without turning around, he said, "When I was a wee little boy, I got burnt real bad. It healed over, but I ain't never forget the pain of it. It's an awful way to die." Then turning, he faced Mama. "Miss Logan, you find someone to sign my credit, and I'll consider it deeply." After we left the Turners, Stacy asked, "Mama, who you going to get to sign?" But Mama, her brow furrowed, did not reply. I started to repeat the question, but Stacy shook his head, and I settled back wondering. Then fell asleep. I love that ending. That was the end of chapter 4. So that ending reminds me, obviously, I am African American, and sometimes in our community, I know around like Black Friday, we like to not shop at certain places because a lot of the black dollar is spent all year round, but especially during holidays, you see an increase in our sales. And so this kind of sounds like a concept of like, or not shopping places that don't value you. Like, for example, I have a difficult time at Walmart. A lot of the times, you know, stuff isn't where it's supposed to be. It's priced incorrectly. People can't really assist you. The lines are super long. Like, it's a horrible experience shopping at Walmart most of the time. But it's right around the corner. It has most of the things you need. Like, it's just convenient. And so that's kind of what this sharecropper was going through. Like, I don't want to, you know, I understand what you're saying about not going up there and fooling with the Wallaces, but that affects my whole lifestyle. This is the only place I can get the food and things that I need for my family. Like, you know, and it's really cool that the mom, who is also the teacher of the local school, is like really advocating for her community to stay safe and to honor themselves and shop in places where they're actually treated with respect. So I love the dignity that's being taught here. And this book is getting more interesting and more interesting about the chapter. So I will read chapter 5 later. I appreciate everybody that tuned in. I hope you got something from it. We didn't have to look up no words today. I usually been looking up words, but this was an easy, this was a great flow. Now, actually, I was about to say easy, but it's not actually. With the accent and the way some of the stuff is written and apostrophes and, you know, things being spelled, this is what I guess we call, you know, ebonics or just, you know, culture, like dialect, like how a black Southern woman would talk back in those times right after slavery. So this is kind of the language of the time. So it gives you a feel. So I hope that I was able to read it with clarity for you all to understand. And I'll read chapter 5 another time. Thank y'all so much. Peace.